The risk of spending too much time living in certain ideological silos is that you might begin to think that behavior which is normal and encouraged within those silos is going to be normal and encouraged outside those silos, and sometimes
it just isn't.
Viva Frei, Montreal litigator turned YouTuber, and by now I'm sure you've all heard the story of a TikToker named Claira Janover, who made a TikTok video in which she explained how she felt about people who said all lives matter.
The next person who has the sheer nerve, the sheer entitled caucasity to say all lives matter, I'ma stab you. I'ma stab you, and while you're struggling and bleeding out, I'ma show you my paper cut and say, my cut matters too.
Now, the video stylistically was very reminiscent of Chaz Smith's video, Water Is Not Wet, and if you haven't seen that video, you absolutely have to go and watch that video right now. It's a classic.
Water's not wet! To say that something is wet means that the water on the surface of that something can be removed.
Now, obviously, people did not take issue with the style of her video. They took issue with the substance of her video and the things she said in that video. Her TikTok video went totally viral. She was put on super duper mega blast on social media. Claira, who is a Harvard graduate, apparently lost her job at Deloitte as a result of the video. And in a couple of follow-up videos, which I believe were also TikTok videos, Claira blames the fact that she lost her job not on what she said or how she said it, but she blames it on Trump supporters who are trying to exploit her message to make her lose her job.
Trump supporters just took my job away from me. My future's entirely compromised because Trump supporters have decided to come for my life. I know this is what Trump supporters wanted. My Black Lives Matter TikToks were picked up by conservatives and spread and shared, and people were demanding that I be fired, which I just got. Even though they claim to stand against systematic bias, racism, and unequal treatment. So do the thousands of Trump supporters sending me hate messages, death threats, and violent messages. I'm still not going to stop talking about and defending Black Lives Matter.
According to Claira, not only did she lose her job, but she has been getting death threats and all sorts of threats, which I have no doubt are true. The internet and social media can be a very, very ugly place at times. Now, I've been following this story from the very beginning, and I've got to say I find everything about it to be extremely discouraging. It highlights the insidious nature of cancel culture, and it really brings out all of the worst aspects of social media. But being discouraged is a useless and destructive emotion unless it is also coupled with the encouragement of learning from a situation. What can we learn from the Claira Janover situation? We can learn a lot. Let's start with the most obvious and non-controversial lesson to be learned from all of this.
It is never okay to threaten anybody, period, full stop.
There might actually be a middle group of people who don't fully appreciate that words on a screen nonetheless have a devastating impact on the person who receives them, and that threats on the internet are not less serious because they're just words on a screen. I think the bottom line is that almost everybody recognizes that it is never okay to threaten someone with physical violence. It's just that most people live by that principle, while those who don't just don't care, which brings us back full circle to what Claira Janover said in the first place. I think most people have the requisite intellectual fortitude to admit that Claira did not mean what she said literally. I can see how some people might have thought she was being serious at the beginning, but it quickly became clear that she was entering into some sort of ill-advised analogy.
I'ma stab you.
And while you're struggling and bleeding out, I'ma show you my paper cut and say,
my cut matters too.
A hyperbolic, violent analogy, but an analogy nonetheless. That being said, I can see how other people could construe this as a threat, or at the very least a not-so-veiled dog whistle, such that it can be regarded as an actual threat. My rule as to whether or not something can be reasonably construed as a threat: add Mr. or Madam President in front of it, and if it lands the FBI at your front door, it is going to be construed as a threat,
and you should not say it.
But because of the ideological silo in which Claira Janover resides, she thought that using a violent and hyperbolic analogy was an appropriate and reasonable way of expressing herself, and she quickly found out that when she left that silo, other people didn't feel quite the same way. The backlash that Claira Janover is currently experiencing may not be proportionate, it may not be justified, but it was certainly predictable, and it seems that Claira is unfortunately not learning any of the right lessons.
But still, I have to say, you play with matches, you get burned.
You don't think he overreacted?
Well, yeah, that's why I probably didn't expect myself to react the way he did, but he had to expect a reaction.
When the proverbial poo-poo hits the fan, who does Claira blame? She blames everyone except herself. She blames Trump supporters for having taken her job. She blames Deloitte for being cowards.
Trump supporters just took my job away from me. My future's entirely compromised because Trump supporters have decided to come for my life. You guys suck. Racist Trump supporters. I know this is what Trump supporters wanted. My Black Lives Matter TikToks were picked up by conservatives and people were demanding that I be fired, which I just got, even though they claim to stand against systematic bias, racism, and unequal treatment.
She mischaracterizes what her critics are saying by saying that they took issue with her message and not the manner in which she expressed that message.
I'm still not going to stop talking about and defending Black Lives Matter. You can't take away my spirit and my devotion towards human rights.
And it is a very tough and frustrating thing when you make a mistake, but the consequences of that mistake are disproportionately excessive to the nature of that mistake. That is exactly what is happening to Claira right now. She made a mistake. 10 years ago, that mistake would have disappeared into the ether, but now, given the internet and social media, that mistake is going to live on and echo forever. In today's day and age, mistakes take on a life of their own. They exist in perpetuity. And human nature being what it is, even if someone acknowledges that they made a mistake, but they feel that the consequences that they are suffering as a result of that mistake are excessive and disproportionate in comparison to that mistake, they then begin lashing out at other people and blaming them for what they are living through instead of blaming themselves. It's something I've said multiple times in previous vlogs. People, generally speaking, deserve to be forgiven, but in order to deserve to be forgiven, you have to apologize for your mistake and you have to acknowledge that you made a mistake. And here Claira is doubling down on her original mistake by mischaracterizing the reason for which people are angry at her. It had nothing to do with her message per se. It had exactly to do with the manner in which she thought it was appropriate to express that message.
Caucasity. I'ma stab you. I'ma stab you.
And she makes the same disingenuous mischaracterization for why Deloitte fired her. They did not fire her because of what she said. They fired her because of how she said it. They fired her because she thought it was appropriate to do what she did, to use words like caucasity. I had never heard of the term caucasity, and honestly, I thought she had made a mistake in the original video, but it turns out caucasity is in fact a word of sorts. It has a specific definition, and it is not exactly a non-offensive definition. When I worked at the big law firm, I volunteered for the recruitment committee and I got to see exactly how the hiring process worked. When I started my own boutique litigation firm, I did all the hiring myself. When it comes to hiring, you are actually not looking only for competence, you are looking for someone who's going to work well in a team. Regardless of whether you agree or disagree with Claira's underlying message, if you're her employer and you see her expressing herself in such a manner on social media and you look at this, you are going to ask yourselves whether or not she is going to work well in a team, in a workplace environment. And I say you're going to ask yourself this as an employer, but when you watch this video, you already know the answer. This is already starting fights before she even enters the workplace. Deloitte is a multinational professional services network. Can you imagine if one of their multi-million-dollar clients goes up to one of the senior members of a team and says, I think I saw someone on our team on TikTok threatening to stab somebody, and they say, oh no, don't worry, that was just an analogy. In the olden days, this type of mistake would probably be without consequence. It would disappear into the ether. Maybe at worst, you would sit down with someone from the team and they would say,
Look, we'd really appreciate if you don't say things like this in the future.
Whereas now people are posting them on social media saying, I want the entire world to see this, and an employer might not like that so much. And another lesson that Claira, I think, is soon going to learn, publicly bashing your former employers is not going to bode well for future employment. It's something I can tell you from the hiring process. The worst thing a prospective employee can do is talk badly about their former employer because the person interviewing them knows sure as sugar in the future that employee is going to be doing the same thing to another employer about them. And the same holds true of relationships. If you have a partner now that is complaining about an ex, you know sure as sugar they're going to be complaining about you to a future partner, and the question is whether or not you want to get into that kind of mess in the first place. Claira could have recognized her mistake, apologized to her employer, recognized that they too had to make a hard decision. She could have remained silent altogether, but calling them cowards and saying they're going to be on the wrong side of history is wrong, not just as relates to them, but it's going to hurt her in the future for any potential employer. Cancel culture is getting out of hand. I think we can probably all agree with that at this point. People's lives are being ruined for acts that 10 years ago would have gone unnoticed. Some might say that's actually a good thing. People are finally being held to account for acts that would have otherwise gone unnoticed a decade or two ago. I tend to disagree. I think cancel culture is holding humans to a fundamentally unhuman level of infallibility. People make mistakes. Some mistakes are bigger than others. Some mistakes have bigger consequences than others. Some mistakes have disproportionately big consequences to the mistake itself. But humans are fundamentally fallible. They make mistakes and they deserve to be forgiven for those mistakes when they can acknowledge those mistakes, apologize for those mistakes, and change their behavior in the future. And that is the ultimate paradox of cancel culture. It doesn't incentivize apologies. It just actually makes people want to dig in their heels, double down on the mistakes, because cancel culture itself weaponizes the apology. As far as I'm concerned,
Cancel culture.
and let's move into compassion culture, where people are going to be incentivized to apologize and make amends with those who they have wronged. But until that happens, we can all learn a lot from this Claira Janover situation, especially Claira Janover herself. And with that said, if you like my videos and you like my content, please be sure to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, drop a comment in the comment section below because it feeds the algorithm. If you want to support the channel, all of these support links are in the pinned comment. We've got merch, PayPal, Subscribe Star, YouTube membership. All members get sneak peeks of my videos to the the extent that I can provide them. But above all else, take care of yourselves, check in on your friends and family, make sure everyone around you is doing well, forgive even if it doesn't mean forgetting, and now you know your vlog. Peace out. Booyah.